Our next speaker is Mrs. Boma Alabi, Officer of the Order of Niger and Senior Advocate of Nigeria. She is the Senior Partner at Primera Africa Legal, where she leads the corporate governance and compliance practice. She's an experienced arbitrator and accredited mediator with expertise in international tax law, maritime law, mergers and acquisitions, and capital market transactions. She served as the president of the Commonwealth Lawyers Association from 2011 to 2013. And she's the first and only woman president in the over 50 years history of this association of lawyers from 54 countries across 7 continents. She has also served on the board of Alpha International and currently chairs the Shipping Association of Nigeria. In addition, she sits on several corporate and advisory boards, including the ARM Harif Infrastructure Investments and Cowrie Asset Management Limited. Mrs. Boma Alabi's session today is all about women's rights, understanding the legal frameworks that empower and protect. Please welcome Mrs. Boma Alabi. Welcome, Ma. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. It wasn't permitting me to unmute myself. So first of all, let me start by wishing all of us a happy International Women's Day. I see women in this room. I was privileged to listen to the previous speakers and their excellent presentations. I see women of courage, resilience, and I wish us all a happy International Women's Day. And it's time for the society to give in order to gain the best from us. So the giving is not from us. We've been given without gaining, and it's time for society to give to get the best from us. Now, my topic is really very simple. I've been asked to talk about the legal framework around issues, and I'm going to approach this from our cultural practices and what we consider to be the norm. You'll be very surprised to find, and I have deliberately not done slides, or neither am I quoting law, because I don't want anyone thinking this is specific to me. I'm going to speak generically about our rights and the legal framework around gender diversity. And then if you have particular questions at the Q&A session, I'll respond to them. Otherwise, seek competent legal advice in your particular situation. So I'm going to look at typical, what we accept as normal, and what does the law say in relation to all of that. I'm sure all of us have heard if you don't behave, I will send you packing. And I will pack you back to your father's house. Those are sort of standard cultural messaging that we receive as women in across our cultures in Nigeria. Oh, the children belong to the man. We'll keep our children and we'll send you away. Again, that's standard sort of cultural messaging that we receive in our environment. Not to talk about the harmful traditional practices around widowhood. You know, we've seen all these awful movies which are based on the reality in a lot of cases where widows are made to drink the water with which they wash the cups of their late husbands to prove that they didn't have a hand in killing him. They're forced to shave their hair, sit in dust or whatever it is, and forced to wear black. I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with wearing black if you choose to. But when it's imposed on you, that's a different thing. And then for a period of time, and this is a cultural thing, and if you don't do it, then you're ostracized, or you have other consequences imposed on you. And so I'm going to come from those perspectives. Let me say clearly, number one, you have a right to shelter. Once you're married and you move into that home, regardless of whether you paid for it or not, regardless of whether it is in your name or not, if that's your primary home, then you have rights. And the law will protect those rights. But it is up to you to seek to enforce your right around that. If you don't know, you will not enforce a right that you don't know you have. So you're used to hearing, I'll send you packing, I'll send you back to your father's house. And when they do that, you quietly go away. Don't do that. You have rights and entitlements around your primary matrimonial home. And therefore, you have a right to shelter. And your partner, your husband cannot simply say, I'm sending you packing and chuck your bags out of your home, as we see in the movies. That's number one. Hold that thought. Now, in relation to your children, the children of the married, yes, they may be their father's children, they are bearing his name, and so on and so forth. No one is disputing that. But children's rights are separate from the parents' rights, father be it the father or the mother. And the children's rights are governed by the Child's Rights Act. And that act says we must put the interest of the children before anybody else's interest, be it the father or the mother. So we'll be looking at the children's rights from what's best for the children. Generally speaking, and the courts have in all the decisions, when I say all, not entirely 100%, but majority, have found that, young children are better off with their moms because the mothers are usually the primary caregivers and look after the children better. It's certainly with the girl child is almost 100%. And generally with children under the age of 10, the courts will lean in the direction of keep them with their mother where they're properly looked after. And then the father pays maintenance and upkeep and school fees until such a time as the children are old enough to choose which parent they wish to reside with. So our laws and the way they're enforced are actually very pro the child and quite gender friendly in a way that because of our traditional practices and cultural beliefs, we may be surprised to find that that's the case. But what I'm saying to you basically is put aside the traditions and look at what the law actually says when it comes to your children and your rights as a woman. Because if you're making decisions based on what you know, which are these harmful traditional practices, you're going to be disadvantaging yourself unduly when the legal framework is actually there to enforce your rights. And so you should not just look at tradition, you should look at what the law actually says and whether those rights are available to you and whether they can be enforced. Now, violence against persons generally, and of course, particularly against our gender. Again, there are federal laws protecting you from that, including the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. And there are additional state laws. Lagos State has led at this gender protection and just violence protection from violence against persons. Most recently, Abia State has just launched its Inchedo, I think it's called, facilities and regulations also around protecting women and vulnerable persons from violence. So, violence against the person is not just someone slapping you or hitting you or punching you. If they hold you down and force you to cut your hair, that's violence against you, because you cannot touch me without my consent. That's the bottom line. So restraining me, cutting my hair against my will, or anything that you physically do to me against my will and without my consent is sufficient to qualify as violence against me as a person. So please widen your definition of what constitutes domestic violence or violence against a person, to understand that physical restraint from movement or wearing what you want or doing what you want to do also falls within that basket. And by the way, I apologize for my late entry into the room. In on a different time zone, and I thought I didn't realize I was 1 hour behind until it sort of clocked. So my apologies on that. And then let's talk about widowhood, and again going back to harmful traditional practices. In some cases, and I have seen that, where a woman is widowed, in the midst of that trauma, she's just lost her husband. There's financial uncertainty because he may be the main provider or a joint provider with her. And the children have just lost their father. And you're all emotionally upset and coming to terms with this new reality. And what happens? Relatives show up. They don't even give you an opportunity to pack your bags, and they kick you and your children out of your home. Because as far as they're concerned, according to their traditions, they inherit. I saw this happen to an auntie of mine who was married to a gentleman from a part of, again, Abia State, where they have a matrilineal line of inheritance. Traditionally, this couple we both worked very hard, built a home, built a business together, and he died suddenly of a heart attack. And she's traumatized. She's in shock. It wasn't like he'd had cancer and you'd had some warning, he'd been terminally ill or any of that. It was a sudden death. And to compound her distress and trauma, the late husband's relatives literally came and locked her and her children, who were all minors at the time, out of their home, padlocked their office and their businesses, and took over their assets. And this woman, literally with a handbag and 3 children, had to get in a car to return to her family, who then began a rehabilitation, financial rehabilitation, in addition to helping her deal with the emotional trauma of losing her husband and helping the children deal with the emotional trauma of losing their father. Now, that's a harmful traditional practice that should not be in any way countenanced or tolerated. The law is clear on that, and it has gone all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court has said clearly that any cultural or tradition that says a woman cannot inherit land or anything because of her gender is biased and discriminatory, and it is wrong. And women have equal rights of inheritance as men and cannot be discriminated against on the basis of their gender. So that's something that the Supreme Court has decided on, and it is part of our law in Nigeria. And please spread the word so that if there's anybody you know of who is dealing with this sort of harmful traditional practice, or possibly in that situation, the sooner they're aware, the better for them. So that's talking about personal law and what could happen in the home. Now, I'm going to go to legal framework and gender protection in the workspace. So if you're in a workspace, and yes, some of us are fortunate we're in some of the bigger institutions, the banks, the financial institutions, hospitals, hospitality, manufacturing, and so on. But even there, you will find that there's a gap. They haven't put in place a sexual harassment policy. They haven't put in place a diversity policy. There's nothing, no rule book to tell you what to do if your line manager is crossing lines and boundaries and making you uncomfortable. You have a right to ask those questions, number one, before you start work, even after you start work, at any point. If you have a situation where, and this is more in some of the larger institutions, they have unions representing workers, both senior and junior, then again, you can perhaps, rather than individually asking these questions, go through the unions. But it is a right to be protected in your workplace from sexual harassment. And it's important that we all know that and we find a way to call it out and ensure that there's a policy in place. What I tend to do is to be proactive about that policy. If it's not there, I'll be the one to sort of say, okay, why don't I put something together and put it forward to HR to say, there's a gap here. Can we not put this in place for everybody's protection and for the use of, for guidelines for all of us? And you find that when one is proactive in that way, it's actually usually welcomed because people agree with the idea, but who's going to do the work? And how much will it cost? And those are some of the things that then stop them from taking it to the next level, which is to actually putting that policy in place, articulating it, and putting it in place. So those are some of the legal protections that we have in place that we do not use, because I think in a lot of cases we don't know that we have them. But it's important that we know, and we begin to exercise our rights, protect our rights, speak up for our female friends, call out behavior that we see in society that's reinforcing those harmful traditional practices, and in so doing, begin to establish a culture that is more gender equitable and friendlier towards women's rights. I've seen situations, and I commend the men who have stood up to those situations where might is right. So you've got the money, and the woman is not as financially strong, and therefore, despite her ability, or rather her knowledge of her rights and her efforts to enforce those rights, the dominant male with the money will use the security agencies and so on to actually erode her freedom and her rights when they should be protecting it. If that sort of unfortunate situation happens, what I'd say is thank God this is 2026. Thank God we have social media. Thank God we have the ability to effectively be our own reporter, our own Arise TV, our own CNN, our own BBC, and we put something out there and it goes viral and it begins to call them out and acts as a check. And A recent example would be the case of we've all seen it in the social media involving the Minister of Works. So there's a woman who claims she's made a supply to him nearly 12 years ago. He's not paid, and so it's a civil claim. And the next we see is she's been taken to Abuja and been harassed for that. She also, of course, accused him of sexual harassment. But imagine if there was no social media, what could have happened in that sort of situation? But the social media has acted as a check on possible use of the power that you have, or misuse of power. Giving this example, just based on what is being reported, obviously not saying anything as the veracity of the claims, whether they're true or they're not. It's simply an example of what could happen and how social media can come in useful in those situations. So that's the topic I've been asked to speak about in a nutshell. And that's really talking about the legal framework protecting rights as women in the Nigerian society. Of course, if you go to Sharia law, which is also personal law, Sharia law is actually very detailed in its protection of women's rights. It is far more detailed than even the constitutional rights that are given to us, down to the rights of inheritance, your entitlement to shelter, to maintenance, and so on. So it's to some people it might seem surprisingly forward-thinking in its protection of women's rights in the Sharia law. So that's also something to bear in mind, that if you are Muslim and your personal relationships are governed by Sharia law, then you do have a very well articulated system of protection and provision already detailed within that. So that's as much I'll say at this point. I always prefer to have an interaction so that I'm not sort of talking in a vacuum. If you ask your questions, I'll be very, very happy to answer them. I'm grateful to the organizers for the opportunity to participate. And once more, wish us all a very happy International Women's Day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ma. That was a really enlightening session.